On July 12, 1943, hundreds of tanks clashed near Prokhorovka in the greatest battle of World War II. The Soviet tank army was commanded by a man whose name has gone down in history, Pavel Rotmistrov, a peasant boy from near Tver who became the chief marshal of the armored forces, the creator of a new type of tank army that crushed the Wehrmacht, a hero whose fate was full of triumphs and tragedies. Today, we will tell you about the king of tank battles. If you are interested in the history of great military leaders and key battles that changed the course of the war, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. And in the comments, let's discuss a controversial question. Was the Battle of Prokhorovka a victory or a defeat, given the huge losses of the Soviet tank army, but the achievement of a strategic goal? Write your opinion. On July 6, 1901, in the small village of Skovorovo in the Tver province, a boy named Pavel was born into the large peasant family of Alexei and Anna Rotmistrov. No one could have imagined then that this child was destined to become one of the greatest tank commanders of the 20th century, a man whose name would forever go down in history as a symbol of courage, strategic talent, and an unyielding will to win. The Rotmistrov family lived modestly, like millions of other Russian peasants of that time. His father worked the land, his mother ran the household and raised the children. Pavel was one of 7 children, and from an early age, he learned what hard peasant labor was. At the age of 10, he was already helping his parents with the farm, and at 14 he began to earn his own money, working as a log rafter on the Tver River. This work was incredibly hard and dangerous. Huge logs were floated down the turbulent spring waters, and it took extraordinary strength, dexterity, and courage to cope with such a task. It was here, on the log raft, that the future marshal's character and physical endurance were tempered. Young Pavel learned not to fear danger, to make quick decisions in critical situations, and to take responsibility. These qualities would become decisive in his military career. The revolutionary events of 1917 completely changed the life of the country and the fate of young Pavel Rotmistrov. The Civil War divided Russia into irreconcilable camps, and the 18-year-old young man made a decision that determined his entire future life. In 1919, he voluntarily joined the Red Army. It was a conscious choice made by a simple peasant boy who believed in the ideas of the new government and was ready to defend them with arms in hand. Rotmistrov ended up in the cavalry, where he rose from the rank of private to commander. But what led him to the tank forces, which would become his life's work? The 1920s were a time of formation for Pavel Rotmistrov as a professional soldier. After the end of the Civil War, he did not retire, like many of his comrades, but decided to devote his life to the army. In 1922, Rotmistrov graduated from the Higher Cavalry School, receiving a high-quality military education. This was a time when the Red Army was undergoing a period of formation and modernization, when the romance of cavalry attacks was giving way to an understanding of the need for modern weapons. The young commander followed the development of military technology with interest, especially the appearance of the first tanks. Even then, he understood that the future of warfare lay with mechanized troops capable of delivering powerful, concentrated strikes. In 1931, Rotmistrov's fate changed dramatically when he was sent to study at the Stalin Military Academy of Mechanization and Motorization of the Red Army. It was a prestigious military educational institution that trained commanders of the new mechanized forces. Here, Rotmistrov immersed himself in the study of tank warfare theory, armored vehicle design, and tank unit tactics. The academy became a real forge of knowledge for him. Teachers noted his analytical mind, his ability to quickly grasp complex material, and, most importantly, his ability to think outside the box and find new tactical solutions. Rotmistrov enthusiastically studied the experience of using tanks in World War I and analyzed the theoretical works of Soviet and foreign military specialists. In 1934, he graduated from the academy with honors and was appointed chief of staff of a mechanized brigade. This was a time of active construction of mechanized corps in the Red Army. The Soviet leadership understood that the coming war would require the mass use of tanks, and the country was preparing for this. Rotmistrov had the opportunity to apply his knowledge in practice by participating in the development of regulations, the organization of combat training, and exercises. His organizational skills and deep understanding of the specifics of tank forces did not go unnoticed. The young commander's career developed rapidly. By the end of the 1930s, he commanded a tank battalion, then became deputy commander of a tank brigade. But the real test was yet to come. In the winter of 1939-1940, the Soviet-Finnish War began, which became the first serious combat experience for many Soviet commanders, including Rotmistrov. By this time, he was commanding the 35th Light Tank Brigade as part of the 7th Army, which was operating on the Karelian Isthmus. The war with Finland turned out to be much more difficult than the Soviet command had anticipated. Finnish troops skillfully used the terrain, dense forests, numerous lakes, and swamps, to organize a stubborn defense. The famous Mannerheim Line was a system of fortified areas, pillboxes and bunkers, anti-tank ditches and roadblocks. Breaking through this defensive line required not only the courage of the soldiers, but also the competent use of tanks in difficult conditions. Rotmistrov personally commanded the tank attacks on the Mannerheim Line. It was an invaluable experience of tank cooperation with infantry and artillery in breaking through fortified defenses. The tanks had to operate in incredibly difficult conditions. Deep snow, severe frosts, and wooded and marshy terrain created enormous difficulties. Finnish anti-tank weapons inflicted significant losses on Soviet armored vehicles. Rotmistrov learned from his own experience that a tank is not a universal weapon that can solve all problems. It required the skillful interaction of various branches of the military, thorough reconnaissance, and competent planning of operations. Each attack on Finnish fortifications cost the lives of Soviet tankers. But gradually, the commanders gained experience, learned to avoid mistakes, and find weak spots in the enemy's defenses. Colonel Rotmistrov proved himself to be a brave and decisive commander who was not afraid to personally lead attacks. His brigade participated in the breakthrough of the Mannerheim Line in February 1940, when Soviet troops finally managed to break through the Finnish defenses. For his skillful command and courage, Rotmistrov was awarded the Order of the Red Banner. But the main reward was invaluable combat experience. Rotmistrov understood the most important principle. Tanks must act in a massive manner, on the main direction of the strike, while ensuring close cooperation with other branches of the armed forces. He would apply this principle in the largest tank battles of the Great Patriotic War. On June 22, 1941, the Great Patriotic War began. At that time, Colonel Pavel Rotmistrov held the position of Deputy Commander of the 5th Tank Division of the 3rd Mechanized Corps, stationed in the Baltic Military District. The war took the Soviet troops by surprise, despite numerous warnings from intelligence about the impending German attack. On the morning of June 22, German aircraft launched massive strikes on Soviet airfields, destroying most of the aircraft on the ground. The invasion began by German troops, who had gained vast experience in modern warfare during campaigns in Poland, France, and the Balkans. The 3rd Mechanized Corps, in which Rotmistrov served, was thrown into counterattacks against German tank wedges pushing deep into Soviet territory. The first days of the war were a terrible ordeal for Rotmistrov and his comrades. German aircraft dominated the air, striking columns of Soviet troops. Communications were constantly disrupted, making it difficult to command the troops. German tank and motorized divisions, acting in accordance with their well-rehearsed blitzkrieg tactics, surrounded and destroyed Soviet units. The Corps suffered enormous losses in personnel and equipment. Rotmistrov experienced firsthand the tragedy of the early stages of the war. His division lost almost all of its equipment and suffered heavy personnel losses. The retreat took place under extremely difficult conditions: constant bombing, a shortage of fuel and ammunition, and the threat of encirclement. The remnants of the corps fought their way through Lithuania and Belarus. In early August 1941, Rotmistrov and a group of soldiers managed to break out of the encirclement on the Bryansk front. It was a real miracle. Many thousands of Soviet soldiers and commanders died or were captured in those terrible cauldrons of the summer of 1941. Breaking out of the encirclement required incredible courage, fortitude, and the will to win. Rotmistrov proved that he was a true warrior, capable of not breaking even in the most desperate circumstances. The tragic experience of the first months of the war taught him a lot. He saw what mistakes in the organization of defense, lack of clear command of troops, and underestimation of the enemy could lead to. But what awaited him next? When the enemy was rushing towards Moscow, in September 1941, Pavel Rotmistrov received a new assignment as commander of the 8th Tank Brigade, part of the 11th Army of the Northwestern Front. It was one of the new tank brigades created to replace the mechanized corps that had been destroyed in the first months of the war. The tank brigades were smaller in number, but more maneuverable and controllable. Rotmistrov had to quickly form a combat-ready unit and lead it into battle. In the fall of 1941, the Battle of Moscow began. German troops, implementing Operation Typhoon, were pushing towards the Soviet capital. The 8th Tank Brigade, commanded by Rotmistrov, took part in fierce battles for Kalinin, now the city of Tver. It was a key point on the northwestern approaches to Moscow. On October 17, 1941, German troops captured Kalinin. Rotmistrov received orders to counterattack and recapture the city. It was an incredibly difficult task. The Germans had already managed to gain a foothold in the city and had brought in artillery and anti-tank weapons. Rotmistrov's tank brigade launched a daring attack, broke into the streets of Kalinin, and engaged in street fighting. The tankers fought with fury and desperation. They understood that they were defending the approaches to the capital, that the fate of Moscow depended on their steadfastness. However, the forces were too unequal. After fierce fighting, Rotmistrov had to withdraw his brigade. The losses were significant, and the Germans were bringing in more and more new forces. This retreat nearly cost Rotmistrov his career and even his freedom. He received an order to hold a certain line, but, assessing the situation and realizing that carrying out the order would lead to the complete destruction of the brigade without any benefit, he decided to withdraw his troops a few kilometers. It was an incredibly risky decision. In those days, failure to carry out an order could result in execution. Rotmistrov was almost court-martialed, but fortunately, common sense prevailed. The command assessed that he had saved people and equipment for future battles. True glory came to Rotmistrov's brigade in December 1941, when the Soviet counteroffensive began near Moscow. Rotmistrov's tankers participated in the liberation of the city of Klin, displaying mass heroism. On January 11, 1942, for the mass heroism of its personnel, the 8th Tank Brigade received the honorary title of Guards and was renamed the 3rd Guards Tank Brigade. It was a moment of triumph for Rotmistrov and his tankers. In the spring and summer of 1942, the 3rd Guards Tank Brigade under Rotmistrov's command continued to fight on various sections of the front. In July, the brigade took part in the battles for Voronezh, trying to stop a new German offensive on the southern wing of the Soviet-German front. The German summer offensive of 1942 was aimed at capturing the Caucasus, with its oil fields and breaking through to the Volga. The situation was critical. German troops were rapidly advancing south and east. In the autumn of 1942, Rotmistrov's brigade was transferred to Stalingrad, where one of the greatest battles of World War II was unfolding. Stalingrad became a symbol of unyielding Soviet resilience. The fighting was for every house, every street, every meter of land. In November 1942, Operation Uranus began, a grand counteroffensive by Soviet troops, the goal of which was to encircle the German forces near Stalingrad. Tank units played a key role in this operation. By this time, Rotmistrov was already commanding the 7th Tank Corps, having been promoted to Major General of the Tank Forces in July and Lieutenant General in December. This was a rapid rise through the ranks, testifying to the recognition of his talent by front commanders. Rotmistrov's 7th Tank Corps participated in the encirclement of the German forces in Stalingrad. But the main test was yet to come. In December 1942, the German command made a desperate attempt to break the siege of Paulus's 6th Army in Stalingrad. Army Group Dawn, commanded by Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, one of the most talented German commanders, launched an attack from the Kotelnikovsky area in the direction of Stalingrad. Manstein had a powerful strike force at his disposal, including tank divisions equipped with new heavy tanks. There was a real threat of a German breakthrough to the encircled group. Rotmistrov's 7th Tank Corps, together with the 2nd Guards Army, took part in the defeat of Manstein's group. This was a school of tank warfare for Rotmistrov. He learned to counter a skilled and experienced enemy, to maneuver his forces competently, and to launch counterattacks at the most vulnerable points of the enemy group. The German offensive was stopped, and the blockade of Stalingrad was broken. For his skillful command of the corps, Rotmistrov was awarded the Order of Suvorov, 2nd class, on January 9, 1943. But an even more serious assignment awaited him, one that would change his fate and go down in history. In February 1943, immediately after the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, Lieutenant General Pavel Rotmistrov was appointed commander of the 5th Guards Tank Army. This was an extremely important appointment, as the 5th Guards Tank Army was the first new type of tank formation in the Red Army. Until then, tank armies had been mixed formations, including both tank and rifle corps. This organization reduced the maneuverability and striking power of tank formations. Rotmistrov himself was one of the initiators of the creation of homogeneous tank armies. He presented this idea to Supreme Commander Joseph Stalin and managed to convince him of the advisability of such an organization. The 5th Guards Tank Army consisted of several tank corps, motorized infantry, artillery, and anti-aircraft regiments and support units. It was a powerful striking force, capable of delivering deep, decisive blows to enemy groups, developing success, and advancing into operational space. Tank armies of homogeneous composition became the main striking force of the Red Army in offensive operations. They were to be brought in to break through after the rifle units had broken through the enemy's defenses and rapidly developed the offensive in depth, encircling and destroying large enemy groups. The creation of such armies required not only enormous material resources, thousands of tanks, thousands of vehicles, hundreds of guns, but also a qualitatively new level of troop command. The commander of a tank army had to be able to coordinate the actions of many units, make quick decisions in the dynamic environment of battle, and competently use the strengths of tank forces: speed, maneuverability, and striking power. Rotmistrov understood the full responsibility that fell on his shoulders. He immersed himself in the work of organizing the army, training the staff, and developing tactical maneuvers. It was important not just to have a lot of tanks, but to be able to use them correctly, to concentrate efforts on decisive directions, and to ensure interaction between different units. In the spring of 1943, Rotmistrov's army was in reserve at the Supreme Command headquarters, undergoing intensive combat training. The personnel learned to cooperate, practiced various tactical maneuvers, and conducted maneuvers. Everyone understood that the army would soon be thrown into battle, and that this battle would be decisive. No one knew then that in a few months, the 5th Guards Tank Army would take part in one of the greatest battles of World War II, which would forever go down in the history of military art. In the summer of 1943, a tense lull descended on the Soviet-German front. Both sides were preparing for a decisive battle. The German command was planning Operation Citadel, a powerful offensive on the Kursk Bulge, with the aim of encircling and destroying a large Soviet group. Thanks to intelligence data, The Soviet High Command knew about the impending offensive and decided to meet the enemy with a prepared defense, and then launch a counteroffensive. A deeply echeloned defense was created on the Kursk Bulge with minefields, anti-tank ditches, and numerous fortifications. The Soviet command concentrated enormous forces in this direction. Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army was part of the Steppe Front, which was the strategic reserve of the High Command. The army was located in the Ostrogotsk area, about 300 kilometers from Kursk. The Soviet command's plan was that after repelling the German offensive, Rotmistrov's tank army would be brought into battle to deliver a powerful counterattack. On July 5, 1943, the Battle of Kursk began. German troops struck from the north and south of the Kursk salient. On the southern flank of the Arc, a powerful German force advanced, including elite SS tank divisions equipped with the latest Tiger heavy tanks and Panther medium tanks, as well as Ferdinand self-propelled guns. It was a formidable force. The first days of the battle showed that, despite all the efforts of the Soviet defense, the Germans were slowly but steadily advancing, breaking through one defensive line after another. There was a real threat of German tank wedges breaking through into operational space. On July 11th, the Soviet command decided to bring the 5th Guards Tank Army into battle to launch a counterattack against the German group that had broken through. Rotmistrev's army was ordered to make a forced march and concentrate in the Prokhorovka area by the morning of July 12th to strike the advancing German troops. It was an incredibly difficult order to cover more than 300 kilometers in a matter of hours, bring the army to the concentration area, deploy it for attack, and organize interaction with other troops. Rotmistrov's tankers performed a real feat by completing this march. The tank columns moved day and night, covering an enormous distance. German aircraft struck the marching columns, but the army continued to advance. By dawn on July 12th, the main forces of the army had reached the designated area. But what awaited them at Prokhorovka? July 12, 1943, will forever go down in history as the day of the greatest tank battle of World War II. Early in the morning, after a short artillery barrage, Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army launched an offensive in the Prokhorovka area. German tank divisions, primarily the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, advanced from the opposite side. The field near Prokhorovka turned into an arena for a grand tank battle. Participants on both sides described it as sheer hell. Hundreds of tanks clashed in a deadly battle in a confined space. The roar of gunfire, the roar of engines, and the explosions of shells merged into a continuous, deafening noise. The day turned into night from the acrid smoke of burning tanks and shell explosions. Rotmistrov employed a tactic of close combat. Soviet T-34 tanks charged at high speed into the German battle lines, seeking to engage in close-range combat, where the advantage of German heavy tanks in armor and weaponry was minimized. It was a daring and risky tactic that required incredible courage from the crews. The Soviet tankers went into battle knowing that many of them would not return. German Tiger tanks were equipped with a powerful 88mm gun and thick armor, capable of withstanding hits from Soviet tanks at long ranges. But in close combat, armor against armor, as the tankers said, the odds were even. The battle continued throughout the day. By the evening of July 12th, the battlefield was littered with hundreds of burned and damaged tanks on both sides. The losses of the 5th Guards Tank Army were enormous. The army lost 53% of its 642 tanks and self-propelled guns in a single day of fighting. These were monstrous losses. German troops also suffered significant losses, although the exact figures are still a matter of debate among historians. The main thing was that the German offensive had been stopped. The Germans failed to break through to the rear of the Soviet troops, failed to capture Prokhorovka, and failed to gain operational space. At the cost of enormous sacrifices, the Soviet tankers accomplished their mission and finally forced the German command on the southern face of the Kursk Bulge to abandon its further offensive plans. Operation Citadel had failed. Nevertheless, the enormous losses of the 5th Guards Tank Army could not go unnoticed by the Supreme Command. A commission headed by Georgy Malenkov was sent to the troops to investigate the reasons for the heavy losses. Rotmistrov faced serious trouble. Only the intercession of Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky, or, according to other sources, Nikita Khrushchev, a member of the military council, saved the lieutenant general from Stalin's wrath. After the end of the Prokhorovka battle, heated debates began about whether it was a victory or a defeat. On the one hand, the huge losses of the Soviet tank army indicated a serious tactical miscalculation. On July 12, Rotmistrov's army lost 340 tanks and 19 self-propelled artillery units, either permanently or temporarily, which was 53% of all available combat equipment. Personnel losses amounted to 35,000 men, including 6,500 killed and 9,500 missing in action. These were monstrous figures for a single day of battle. The army effectively attacked the positions of the German SS tank divisions, which had taken up advantageous defensive positions, and suffered enormous losses from German anti-tank artillery and heavy tanks. The German 2nd SS Panzer Corps lost 7,700 men killed and wounded in the battle, as well as about 70 tanks and self-propelled guns, according to various estimates. The ratio of losses was clearly not in favor of the Soviet troops. Rotmistrov's opponents pointed out that the tank army attacked hastily, without proper reconnaissance and artillery preparation. The tanks launched a frontal attack on well-prepared German positions, which led to their mass destruction. In addition, the Germans used Tiger heavy tanks and Ferdinand assault guns for the first time on a large scale, whose armor was virtually impenetrable for Soviet T-34 tanks at long ranges. The Tiger's 88mm guns could hit Soviet tanks at a distance of up to 2 kilometers, while Soviet tankers had to get within 400 to 500 meters to penetrate the frontal armor of German heavy tanks. A special commission, headed by Georgy Malenkov, a member of the State Defense Committee, was sent to Moscow to investigate the reasons for the heavy losses. Rotmistrov faced dismissal, and possibly worse. In those years, major military failures could be tried by a military tribunal. However, Chief of the General Staff Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky stood up for Rotmistrov. According to other sources, he was defended by Nikita Khrushchev, a member of the military council of the Voronezh Front. They pointed out that, despite heavy losses, the strategic objective had been achieved. The German offensive had been stopped, and the German troops' breakthrough into operational space had been thwarted. On the other hand, if we look at the Battle of Prokhorovka in the context of the entire Battle of Kursk and the further course of the war, it really did become a crucial turning point. After Prokhorovka, the German command finally became convinced that Operation Citadel was impossible and began to withdraw its troops. The initiative on the Soviet-German front finally and irrevocably passed to the Red Army. It was with the Battle of Kursk that a period of continuous offensive operations by Soviet troops began, which ended only in Berlin in the spring of 1945. The German war machine suffered a blow from which it was unable to recover. Germany finally lost the strategic initiative and was forced to switch to strategic defense on all fronts. Soviet tank armies, including the 5th Guards, proved that when used correctly, they were capable of delivering powerful blows to the enemy. The bitter experience of Prokhorovka became an important lesson for the Soviet command. Conclusions were drawn about the need for more thorough reconnaissance, better preparation of tank attacks, and improved coordination between tanks, artillery, and aviation. Rotmistrov retained his command of the army, was given the opportunity to correct his mistakes, and proved that he was capable of being a successful commander of a large tank formation. In subsequent operations, he would apply the experience he had gained and achieve impressive successes. After the Battle of Kursk, Rotmistrov's 5th Guards tank army was withdrawn to the reserve to replenish its personnel and equipment. The army received new tanks, self-propelled artillery units, and additional personnel. By August 1943, the army was once again ready for combat. In August-September 1943, Rotmistrov's army took part in the Battle of Kharkov. The commander of the Steppe Front, Army General Ivan Konev, tasked the 5th Guards Tank Army with encircling the German Kharkov group from the southwest. The army was to strike through Gavrilovka, Korotych, and Rayelenovka towards Pokhotalovka, and join forces with Soviet armies advancing from other directions. However, this task proved to be extremely difficult. German troops stubbornly defended the approaches to Kharkov, especially the key village of Korotych, which became the key to Kharkov. Here, along the heights from Pesochin to Lyubotin, there was a powerful German defense. Rotmistrov's army fought fiercely for Korotych for 9 days, suffering significant losses. On August 21 alone, the army lost 75 tanks in a single day of fighting, 70 T-34s and 5 T-70s. By August 24, due to continuous fighting, only 78 T-34 and 25 T-70 tanks remained combat-ready in the army units. Korotych was captured only on August 29, on the 9th day of continuous fighting. By this time, the army had only 50 tanks left, most of which were used as stationary firing points, less than 50% of its artillery, and 10% of its motorized infantry. Kharkov was liberated on August 23 by other armies of the Steppe Front, but the task of encircling the German group was not accomplished. The enemy managed to withdraw its troops. During the operation to liberate Kharkov, the 5th Guards Tank Army lost 324 tanks irretrievably, and another 110 were damaged. These heavy losses showed that Rotmistrov had learned the lessons of Prokhorovka. The army did not retreat in the face of difficulties and accomplished its tasks, albeit at a high price. In the fall of 1943, the 5th Guards Tank Army took part in the Battle of the Dnieper, one of the largest operations of the Great Patriotic War. Crossing the Dnieper, which had a strong right bank with many natural fortifications, was an extremely difficult military task. On October 10, 1943, Rotmistrov's army received an order to cross to the right bank of the Dnieper in the Dyrievka area. The tank units had to cross the wide river, secure a bridgehead, and develop an offensive. This required exceptional courage and skill. Rotmistrov's tankers successfully crossed the Dnieper and participated in expanding the bridgehead on the right bank. On October 19th, army troops participated in the liberation of Pyatikhatki during the offensive in the Kryvyi Rih direction. For his distinction in the battle for the Dnieper on October 14, 1943, Lieutenant General Rotmistrov was awarded the rank of Colonel General of the Tank Forces. In the winter of 1943-1944, the 5th Guards Tank Army participated in one of the most successful operations on the southern wing of the Soviet-German front, the Korsun-Shevchenko operation. This operation became a classic example of the encirclement and destruction of a large enemy group. In late January and February 1944, Soviet troops of the 1st and 2nd Ukrainian fronts carried out a two-sided encirclement of the German Korsun-Shevchenko group, numbering about 80,000 men. Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army, operating as part of the 2nd Ukrainian Front, struck from the south, broke through the German defenses, and entered the rear of the encircled group. On January 28th, in the Zvenigorodka area, Rotmistrov's tankers joined forces with the troops of the 1st Ukrainian Front, closing the encirclement. Tens of thousands of German soldiers and officers found themselves trapped. The German command made desperate attempts to break the encirclement. Powerful tank strikes were launched from the outer front of the encirclement, while the surrounded troops tried to break through. Rotmistrov's army, together with other Soviet units, repelled these attacks, holding the outer front of the encirclement. These were heavy battles in the conditions of winter mud, when tanks got stuck in the mud and supplies to the troops were difficult. But the Soviet tankers held out. By February 17, the encircled German group was completely destroyed. It was a major victory for the Red Army, demonstrating the increased skill of Soviet troops in conducting complex encirclement operations. For its distinction in the Korsun-Shevchenko operation, The 5th Guards Tank Army was awarded the Order of the Red Banner, and Rotmistrov was awarded the Order of Kutuzov, First Class. In the spring of 1944, Rotmistrov's army participated in the Uman-Botashan offensive operation. This was part of a grand offensive by Soviet troops to liberate right-bank Ukraine. In March-April 1944, the 5th Guards Tank Army advanced hundreds of kilometers, liberating Ukrainian cities and villages. On March 26th, Balta was liberated, and then the army continued its offensive in the direction of Kishinev. Rotmistrov's tankers demonstrated great skill in conducting rapid offensive operations, with deep breakthroughs into the enemy's rear. By April 1944, Soviet troops had reached the state border of the USSR, and in some areas had crossed it, entering the territory of Romania. For their successful actions in these operations, 42 formations and units of the 5th Guards Tank Army were given the honorary names of the liberated cities. On April 6, 1944, for his outstanding success in commanding troops, Colonel General of Tank Forces Pavel Alexeyevich Rotmistrov was awarded the title of Marshal of Armored Forces. This was recognition of his merits in the creation and use of a new type of tank army, recognition of his talent as a military leader. In June 1944, one of the largest operations of the Great Patriotic War began, Operation Bagration, to liberate Belarus. It was a grandiose offensive, involving more than 2 million Soviet soldiers and officers. Marshal Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army was chosen as the main mobile force to build on the success after breaking through the German defenses. The army was transferred to the 3rd Belarusian Front under the command of Colonel General Ivan Chernyakhovsky. On June 23, 1944, the Soviet offensive began. The troops of the 11th Guards Army broke through the German defenses, and the 5th Guards Tank Army was brought into the breach. Rotmistrov's tankers rapidly advanced, bypassing enemy resistance and reaching the rear of German formations. On June 25th, the Army's Tank Corps crossed the Berezina River, the very river that had been fatal to Napoleon's army in 1812. For the German troops in 1944, the Berezina also became a symbol of disaster. On June 28th, units of Rotmistrov's army liberated the town of Krupki, defeating the reinforced 5th German Tank Division, which had been sent to meet them. On the night of July 1st, 1944, the army under Rotmistrov's command, together with the 11th Guards and 31st Armies, entered Borisov, and by morning had completely liberated this ancient Belarusian city from the occupiers. The next day, after advancing more than 60 kilometers, the army engaged in fighting for the northern and northeastern outskirts of Minsk. On July 3, 1944, the capital of Belarus was liberated. It was a triumph for Soviet arms. Minsk was liberated just 10 days after the start of Operation Bagration. The pace of the Soviet advance was astonishing. For the liberation of Minsk, Rotmistrov was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union with the Order of Lenin and the Gold Star Medal. This was the country's highest award. After the liberation of Minsk, the 5th Guards Tank Army was tasked with advancing on Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. It was a difficult operation. German troops fought desperately, seeking to delay the Soviet advance and gain time to organize their defenses in the Baltic states. The enemy garrison in Vilnius was reinforced and ordered to hold the city at all costs. Rotmistrov's army struck the enemy group in the Vilnius area. The fighting was extremely fierce. On July 13th, the Vilnius garrison was eliminated, and the ancient Lithuanian city was liberated. However, this operation cost the army heavy losses. In 2 days of fighting, the army suffered significant losses in personnel and equipment. The commander of the 3rd Belarusian Front, General Ivan Chernyakhovsky, considered these losses excessive and blamed the army commander. At Chernyakovsky's request, in August 1944, Marshal Pavel Rotmistrov was removed from his post as commander of the 5th Guards Tank Army and replaced by Lieutenant General Vasily Volsky. Being removed from his position as commander of the army was a heavy blow for Marshal Rotmistrov. He had devoted his entire life to the tank forces, accompanying them on their journey from Kalinin to Vilnius and experiencing both triumphs and tragedies. However, Rotmistrov's military career did not end there. On the contrary, a new, equally important field of activity opened up before him. In August 1944, Pavel Alexeyevich Rotmistrov was appointed deputy commander of the Red Army's armored and mechanized forces. This was an extremely important position that required in-depth knowledge of tank forces, organizational skills, and strategic thinking. In this position, Rotmistrov was responsible for training tank command personnel, developing regulations and instructions, summarizing combat experience in the use of tank forces, and introducing new techniques and tactics. He became one of the leading military theorists of tank warfare in the Soviet Union. Until the end of the war, Rotmistrov did not directly participate in combat operations, but his contribution to the victory was enormous. He summarized the experience of using tank armies in operations during the last year of the war, in the Vistula Oder, East Prussian, Berlin, and other operations. It was the tank armies that became the main striking force of the Red Army in the final operations of the war. They made rapid breakthroughs, surrounded large enemy groups, and captured heavily fortified cities. Rotmistrov analyzed these operations, identified successful tactical techniques and mistakes, and developed recommendations for improving the combat use of tank forces. In March 1945, Rotmistrov was sent to the active army to study combat experience. He visited front and army headquarters, talked with commanders, and personally observed combat operations. This experience was invaluable for the further development of the theory of tank force deployment. After the end of the Great Patriotic War, Marshal Rotmistrov continued to serve in the tank forces. From May 1946 to March 1948, he commanded the armored and mechanized forces of the Soviet Army. This was a period of transition for the army to peacetime, a reduction in the armed forces, but at the same time, a period of reflection on the enormous combat experience of the war. Rotmistrov oversaw the development of new regulations, organizational and staffing structures for tank forces, and training programs for tank commanders. In 1955, Rotmistrov was appointed head of the Military Academy of Armored Forces. This was the pinnacle of his military teaching career. The academy trained the highest command personnel of the tank forces, and Rotmistrov devoted 13 years to its leadership, until 1968. During this time, hundreds of officers passed through the academy, forming the backbone of the Soviet Army's tank forces in the post-war decades. Rotmistrov personally lectured to cadets, sharing his rich combat experience and teaching future commanders the art of tank warfare. Alongside his command work, Rotmistrov was actively involved in military research. He wrote several fundamental works on the history and theory of tank warfare. His book, The Steel Guard, became a classic of military memoirs. In it, he honestly and in detail described the path of the 5th Guards Tank Army, not shying away from difficulties and mistakes. Rotmistrov was also the author and editor of the multi-volume work History of the Great Patriotic War of the Soviet Union. In January 1962, Pavel Alexeyevich Rotmistrov was awarded the highest military rank for tankers, Chief Marshal of Armored Forces. This rank was introduced specifically for outstanding commanders of armored forces, and Rotmistrov became one of only 2 people to receive this rank. It was in recognition of his exceptional contribution to the creation and development of the Soviet armored forces. In 1968, at the age of 77, Rotmistrov retired due to his age. But he did not stop working. He continued to engage in military research, write books and articles, give lectures, and advise military historians. His opinion on the history of tank forces and the Great Patriotic War was extremely authoritative. Rotmistrov was not just a participant in the war, he was one of its creators, a man whose decisions influenced the course of major operations. Pavel Alexeyevich Rotmistrov, died on April 6, 1982, in Moscow, at the age of 80. He lived a long and eventful life, devoting more than 60 years to military service. He was buried at the Novodevichy Cemetery in Moscow, where many prominent figures of Russian and Soviet history are laid to rest. Marshal Rotmistrov's legacy is enormous and multifaceted. He was one of the creators of the Soviet tank armies of uniform composition, a powerful instrument of victory in the Great Patriotic War. It was these tank armies that became the main striking force of the Red Army in the offensive operations of 1943-1945. They surrounded and destroyed large enemy groups, broke through deep into the enemy's rear, and liberated cities and countries. The experience of creating and using Soviet tank armies was carefully studied by military experts around the world and had a huge impact on the development of the theory and practice of using armored forces in the second half of the 20th century. Rotmistrov was an outstanding military theorist. His works on the history and theory of the use of tank forces have become classics of military science. He was the first in the Soviet Union to comprehensively study the experience of the massive use of tank formations and developed the theoretical foundations for their combat use in various types of operations. His books were used to train several generations of Soviet tank commanders. As commander of a tank army, Rotmistrov experienced both triumphs and tragedies. The Battle of Prokhorovka remains a subject of historical debate. Some see it as an example of the unsuccessful use of tank forces, leading to huge losses. Others believe that the strategic objective was achieved and that tactical losses were inevitable in the face of a strong enemy with a technical advantage. As always, the truth probably lies somewhere in between. Rotmistrov was a real person who made mistakes, but he also showed examples of courage, fortitude, and military talent. Most importantly, he served his country honestly and selflessly, making an enormous contribution to the victory over fascism. The memory of Marshal Rotmistrov is immortalized in many cities in Russia and other countries of the former Soviet Union. Streets are named after him, and monuments and memorial plaques have been erected in his honor. In Prokhorovka, the site of his most famous battle, a museum complex dedicated to tank battles and tank troops has been created. Rotmistrov remains a symbol of the Soviet tank forces, a man who devoted his entire life to serving the tank cause and defending the fatherland.